Thanks, Kim, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. My name is Charles Brandt. I'm the Consulting Services Manager here at Marco. My team does a few different things. We're looking at running IT and security assessments, as well as offering those virtual, or sometimes you call them fractional, CIO and CISO services. So obviously, this is a big part of how we build our security programs, building into account the human element of cybersecurity. Prebh and Mike, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Management for email protection. I'm responsible for email efficacy strategy, making sure that we are able to block the malicious emails coming in. I've been with the company almost 4 years now. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, thanks, Prebh and Mike, for joining. As Mike mentioned, Barracuda is a trusted, valued solutions partner with Marco. We do a lot of IT projects across many different industries and sectors with their solutions, and we also include their email security and backup solutions, our managed IT offering as well. So thanks for jumping on, and happy to have you with us on the conversation today. Uh, Going over 10,000 foot view on the agenda here, we're going to dive into some of the top cybersecurity threats facing small to medium sized businesses today in the landscape, and also understanding how the human element is involved, especially in those very common attacks, business email compromise and ransomware, right? The ones that kind of head the list. And then also social engineering, right? What are we seeing as far as success and failures, and how we're managing that, and how it's tied in with that attack chain that hackers and cyber threat actors are using. And then what are some of the best practices that we can use and develop in our security programs and our overall security culture in our companies. And moving into that, it's not just security awareness, certainly, that is going to protect our environments. We use a layered security approach, right? We call this defense in depth. There's a lot of familiar solutions and configurations and physical access control things listed on this list here. That security awareness aspect today, they are the first line of defense. Our end users, sometimes we hear them called our weakest link, unfortunately, right? But with some training, guidance, and development, they really can become those first lines of defense for our businesses and spotting things as they occur. And really want to encourage that as we're in Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Big part of that is focusing on education and preparedness and some of those foundational controls, and how these kind of integrate with one another. So first up, we want to talk a little bit about the Verizon 2024 data breach investigations report. One of my favorite is they come out every year. They cover quite a bit of ground. They've been coming out for over the past 17 years, and it really does provide an in-depth analysis of what's going on out there in the world and the cybersecurity landscape. Other vendors also have some pretty valuable reports as well. I know CrowdStrike had one come out earlier, and Barracuda, you guys, his name is on that list too. It's some really good information. I know we're going to be sending that up as a follow-up to those of you attending today. Those reports are free, and definitely recommend you dive into those a little bit to get a handle on what we're seeing. All right, so kind of the overview of this report here: analyzed over 30,000 incidents, of which over 10,000 were confirmed breaches, right? So out of that, we kind of glean an understanding of what's really happening as part of these incidents, and some trends emerge that we want to kind of call out here. Right, so stolen credentials involved the initial action in 24% of these breaches, right? Getting in and stealing those credentials can be a huge liability and risk to companies, and we'll be covering some of that today. And then those phishing attacks accounted for 14% of the breaches that occurred, right? So we talk about phishing, right? That human element. security awareness. These things are coming to play heavily with these numbers. And overall, the human error did contribute to 28% of those reported breaches. And then probably to nobody's surprise, 70% of malware incidents actually involved ransomware. And then ransomware accounted for 23% of all breaches. So some pretty staggering statistics, and it really pushes home why we're kind of focusing on this as we move through today.
Awesome. So let's talk about some evolving trends and threats. Charles, you gave a really good overview of the DBIR. I agree, it's such a good document to review every year. And the best thing is it's actually available free of cost. I don't believe you even have to register, put in an email address. It's such a good document to look up your own industry, the type of threats that are prevalent amongst your peers, and see like what are the defenses you really need to put into place. So I love that report myself, especially the last year report. It goes into a lot of details. Let's talk a little bit about different industries. I'm not going to go into the details of all of them here. Accommodation, for example, right? Like this is one where Verizon reported that there was a surge in social engineering attacks. And there's a reason behind this, right? Like we are always using accommodation services on regular basis. And it makes sense for attackers to leverage these type of attacks in this industry. Ransomware also stands out for accommodation and food services, so that's something also worthwhile looking out for. Schools, educational institutes, actually really good insight there from the report is that they get hit with most extortion attacks across all the industries. Followed by social engineering tactics. And the biggest element is that the human error is such a critical aspect to this. You have students, faculty who don't always follow the best practices, right? So it's so important to make sure you have the right tools, but more important than that, you have to put in the right training processes in place to ensure that your organization and the users are safeguarded and protected. And most of these attacks are coming in because attackers are looking in for that financial gain, and it's so much easier for them to go after educational institutes just because of the sheer amount of numbers and licenses involved here. Healthcare is another really, I think like I find this really interesting because they do have a lot of defenses in place. There are a lot of like compliance requirements, but at the same time, we've seen, and this is also evident from the Verizon report, is that year over year, the attacks against healthcare industries, they continue. And we saw that last year as well. And they're seeing actually more insider threat attacks coming forth. Again, the human element is so critical here. So important to make sure that the employees and contractors are well trained and you have the best processes and practice in place to safeguard your systems and organization. There's a lot to uncover in terms of different verticals. I highly recommend you check out the report, especially if your industry is not listed here, because it's going to go into the different type of attack vectors, the type of techniques which are used, and why your organizations are being attacked. But something else that the Verizon report actually goes into is the impact of Gen AI. There's been so much buzz around that since the launch of ChatGPT. There have been, other clones of ChatGPT like Fraud GPT, Warm GPT. There's so much fear being installed in people's minds. And, when you talk to a customer or a prospect, they're all asking, am I protected against Gen AI attacks? But let me give you a really important stats from the report and from the Verizon report. And this is also confirmed by analysts like Gartner and Forrester, is that Gen AI is not leading to more advanced and sophisticated attacks. It's definitely leading to increase in volumetric attacks. But when it comes to actual breaches happening, Verizon found that Gen AI was mentioned in less than 100 breaches. So that's something to keep in mind. As long as you have the right processes, the right solutions in place, and you're training your workforce, you will be protected against any Gen AI or advanced email threats which are coming out. So that's something which is really important to mention here. I think we can move on to the next slide.
Our next slide is actually a poll, which I'm going to go ahead and open right now. So we want to see what you think is you perceive as the biggest risk to your organization. Is it business email compromise? Is it phishing/spear phishing, ransomware, or insider threats? So you should have a poll that popped up. You do have a minute. So right now we're at 40 seconds left. So we'd love for you to go ahead and put that answer in. We're starting to get some in, and phishing definitely is running with it right now. When you look at that, so yeah, no one said insider threats yet, and then phishing is still going up. So still have about 20 seconds, and thanks for those that are answering. We appreciate it.
I think some of these are also intertwined. Like you have phishing, but there's also the human element. You need somebody to click on that link. So I think there's some connection there as well.
Absolutely.
I'm always interested in this kind of data.
It is for sure. So no one has listed insider threats with 2 seconds to go. And so I'll go ahead and apply those poll results and share those with the attendee. You go ahead and apply that. So it looks like we had 6 people choose business email compromise. We had our highest percentage with phishing, spear phishing, a couple of people with ransomware, and then none for insider threats. So great insights.
And quite frankly, that's not surprising. Why? Because the human element is involved in all of this. And that's really the nature of our talk today, is the human element. And that's what Prebh said, going down to phishing. So think about the balancing act that's happening here. You have people, right? And they can either be a great line of defense, don't click, don't do things, or what's that? I think I want to click on that and learn a little bit more. So it's a tough balancing act. You know, my father-in-law is 92 years old. He's the president of the Korean War Veterans Association of Minnesota. And he gets emails all the time from lots of groups. And he said, Mike, sometimes I just don't know what to do. Some of these people, I don't know. What do I do? And I said, well, there's something called the front door method. Maybe you should employ that. And of course, there's the big question mark, Mike, what's the front door method? I said, if the doorbell rings and you go to that front door, you look out and you see somebody that you don't know, do you open it up and invite them in? He goes, no, why would I do that? I said, the same thing is true with your email. You have a key on your keyboard that says DEL, right? When you have an email that comes in from somebody you don't know, click that key. If they really want to get a hold of you, they'll find a way, they'll call you, they'll text you or something that along those lines. So it's that first line of defense of being a human that can keep the bad guys out. And then you also have to balance that with a certain level of what we call later on social engineering. So you're trusting versus verifying, right? And then there's the automation part of that, leveraging some of the automation in, let's say, your email responses, right? An automatic response to somebody you don't know, or you set up a rule in that regard as well, pardon me, with regard to your contacts or people you don't know. And then the last part of that is the freedom to be able to do what you need to do versus controlling that, right? So that's always been the biggest conundrum in cybersecurity and in a defense posture. Do you put up a moat or do you let everybody in the drawbridge? So there's really that balancing act, and that's where us as humans come into play. In the end, Walmart doesn't really want to give you a $25 gift card, seriously. And if you're just curious about who is that person that wants me to change my credentials, they really don't, right? That's that tough balancing act. So let's think about that as we move forward in the next section of this talk.
Mike, I love these stories. It's really good examples. So let's talk about the top SMB threats. Going back to the poll results, a lot of people voted for phishing. Totally makes sense. I mean, actually, I also picked phishing in the poll. But when it comes to business email compromise, a lot of times, like, people don't really understand BEC, and many times when they do, they're like, hey, I'm part of such a small organization. Do I really need to be concerned? Based on the data that we see is that these advanced sophisticated email threats like business email compromise, impersonations, conversation hijacking, they are going to be within the 2% of all email threats that are received by all organizations. So the number is really low, but the impact is really high. That's why we wanted to highlight that, right? And the human element, the human aspect of this is so important. And hence why we wanted to just focus on business email compromise. We all know about phishing, but let's talk about VEC, what that is. Very simple type of attack is, somebody has either compromised a domain or they have registered a lookalike domain, which looks just like your organization. Maybe it's missing a letter, it's using a different letter. using a letter from, instead of English, maybe from Greek or Hebrew, which, could look like an A, but it's really not an A, right? To a human, it might look like it's actually, this is my domain, right? And to the untrained human eye, they're going to respond back to that email and make that gift card, send that gift card, or make the PO. So it's a very simple type of attack. It's somebody who's going to impersonate your leadership. Somebody's going to impersonate your brand or domain, send that email in to seek financial gain, right? Typically, this is a fraudulent financial transaction. They're looking for somebody to be sitting on the other side of the network to read that email and respond right away, right? And that urgency is a very critical aspect of it. And this is where like humans often fail because, we see something coming in, says, I need a response right away. And an office receptionist is going to respond to that email, right? If anything, this is going to lead to reconciliation. Somebody can do recon on your email addresses, and that's something we're going to talk about in one of the subsequent slides. But this is why BEC is so important. Very small number of attacks, but real life impact, right? Like this is going to be a monetary loss that your organization is going to face if you don't have the right processes in place. And I keep bringing the word process up again and again, but very important is the human element, right? You need to make sure that the humans are trained. They are able to tell the difference, because if the email, first of all, many SMBs are not going to have the right type of email security solution in place. And when they do, even then efficacy cannot be promised by 100% by any vendor in the market. So it's going to be really important that you are investing in the right technologies and also training the workforce. We all know about ransomware, right? This causes a lot of, sleepless nights and causes a lot of business downtime, spreads like wildfire, and you never really know when the attack is over. Verizon Data Breach also talks about a really important stat here. One out of 3 breaches always includes ransomware, right? It's a type of extortion technique. Once you have a breach, somebody is going to want to have you make a PO or send them Bitcoin or something like that. Social engineering, we kind of touched upon it a little bit, but this is where it's so important for the humans to understand that they cannot let somebody inside the door without knowing who they are. Just like that, if you don't understand, if you don't really recognize who this email is from, don't click on that link. Don't respond to that email. Verify, double verify. And defense in depth is so important here. Mike shared a really good example on the last slide. I think it's so relevant, right? Like we've all seen people fall prey to these type of attacks. And with that, let's go to the next slide, which is anatomy of an attack, right? How do these attacks actually emerge? So email remains the most common attack vector. Our own data and many reports actually talk about 75 to 90% of all cybersecurity attacks, the targeted attacks at least, they start with an email. And the reason is so obvious, right? So easy to craft an email attack, versus, finding the right vulnerability to penetrate a network or web application. So anyone, especially, I talked about Gen AI and the impact of that on volumetric attacks like, spam, extortion, scamming. It makes it so easy to launch this type of attack, right? And with emergence of cloud technologies, you can replicate these attacks so easily. You can have the same service reside on different cloud vendors like GCP, Azure, AWS, all running in sync. You send a burst of email out from one service, pause it for the next few hours, and continue the same attack from a different domain or an IP address, right? So there's so much happening. Attackers are using more advanced techniques, and hence why we also need to stay on top of this, right? So how does a typical email attack unfold? This is likely going to be somebody sending an email. The first line of defense is going to be an email protection solution designed to stop malicious emails from being delivered. No email solution is the same. Many people think like they just need a spam firewall, a phishing protection. Totally agree, you need those, but what you also need is protection against sophisticated attacks. So, if in case, you don't have adequate protection in place, attacker is able to go to the next line of defense. That is when the email lands in the employee's inbox, and if the employee is not trained, and also if you don't have antivirus, firewall, they may end up clicking on that link, right? And hence why it's so important to invest in, some sort of security awareness training program to make sure that you are protected against, any of these social engineered attacks. So somebody goes and clicks on the link that's going to land them on, a fake website that looks like maybe it's a Microsoft page. I've seen so many of these pages which look so real, the domain looks so real. And what's happening is underneath the web page is a very simple script that is doing credential harvesting, or is trying to download an executable to the endpoint, to the user's laptop or the computer that they're using to then launch a ransomware attack. So it's a very simple attack. And then once you have an incident, turns into a breach, and that's where you lose employee customer data. There's a breach of process, and you end up losing proprietary information. So that is really anatomy of an attack. Very simple. Email attacks are just so common these days. They're not going to go away even with the most advanced email security solutions in the market. So stay on top of these attacks, make sure the humans are trained and you're well protected.
So let's look at something that you may have seen before. It's not new, but these threats are manifested daily. And at the end of this, I'll tell you the best way to go about getting around this. So if you look at this is to Daniel Diamond at acme.org from John McDonald at where? Take a look at that domain. Is it Acme or is it something else? But to the untrained eye, very quickly, oh, it's John. I know John. I don't even need to look at the domain. Okay, great. It's December and it's a wire transfer request. So now we're talking about something that's high priority. And it says, hi, Daniel, are you in the office today? I need you to process a wire transfer for me. And so there's a sense of urgency right away from an authority or an executive from his iPad. The first thing you want to think about is if it's really a high priority, is he going to send it an email that I might not get? I might go beyond. I'm not sure. But again, if you look a little bit closer, you'll see a couple of things that are really common in these types of emails in a business email compromise. It's impersonating somebody with a different domain. It's creating a sense of urgency. It's from an authority executive. So what's the best way to get around this? Call them. Just pick up the phone and say, Daniel, do you really need this? Is this really important? Or text them if you can't get them on the phone. But just don't go, got it. Great. Here's the dough. That's not the best way to handle these situations. And I think you probably know that. I'm sure you've seen some of these other examples before where there may have been even something more sensitive within that. Here's another example of that, a little bit different, where you'll see that this is more of a business email compromise service impersonation. So when this email comes in, there's nothing that automatically creates or a bot is dropped or a payload's dropped by clicking on this. But it has a very, very different landing page that normally you might get. And it's hosted on a reputable domain, but it's just a little bit different. And so when you click on this, as Prebh said earlier, your credentials can be harvested and everything else that's underneath can be taken. So again, you've seen these types of examples before, but they're still really prevalent. And the sad part is, as humans, we're still falling for this stuff. Some of this is because we live in a very urgent environment and we're trying to get things done very quickly. And it makes sense. Okay, let's do this instead of taking the time to really kind of go behind the scenes. I don't know how many emails I've gotten recently, somebody saying your PayPal account has now been decremented by so much, or your Microsoft credentials need to be reactivated, or all of those things. In the end, those are all false. The easiest way to check anything like that, go to your PayPal account, see if anything's going on there. But again, hopefully you know those things. You're a smart enough audience. That makes a lot of sense. But we just have to kind of rethink this and rebrand that in our heads.
Mike, there's another interesting element to this.
Absolutely, Mike.
Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, just going back into that overlay with culture, right? Calling that Daniel, making sure that's okay, right? Is that going to be something that's expected and rewarded in kind of that conversation, or is it going to be something be like, well, why are you calling me? Is this something that we're encouraging or discouraging? It's a big piece, very simple but often overlooked, right?
Yeah, and also what's happening, and we've seen this many times in our own research, is that when attackers are launching these PO frauds, right, where they're actually looking for somebody to make a PO, that's happening while your staff is busy making these POs for legitimate transactions, right? And also you probably wouldn't see a PO fraud happening in the times of Thanksgiving. That's where gift card or Amazon fraud kicks in, right? So these are targeted attacks, and attackers are not just launching these attacks randomly. They know when organizations are looking to make certain types of transactions, and they're going to build on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really leads into this slide here too. Looking at kind of decoding what that account takeover looks like. As you mentioned in your breakdown of the attack chain, Prebh, getting in there and understanding how to move a little bit deeper. A lot of the time attackers are in there for quite some time, either compromising additional credentials, whether that's pulling from, saved credentials in the environment or using different tools and even compromised emails to collect additional ones through those kind of fake landing pages that Mike mentioned, right? As we're looking at kind of moving through, sometimes this can be what we call low and slow, right? They're gathering that information, they're doing their internal reconnaissance, watching and learning, even understanding how much an organization might pay when that ransomware attack is eventually launched. Understanding what the critical assets in the business are, even figuring out things like familiar phrasing and how those internal processes work. If I see plenty of examples where these attackers are in for 6 months and just waiting for the right time to strike. That's not always the case. We certainly see weekend breaches, as we call them, to move through real quick. It can occur a little bit differently depending on the situation. And then moving into that eventual monetization, right? Whether that's distributing malware or, as we talked about a little bit before, ransomware, or getting in front of those account transfers, wire transfers, and changing accounts, or even using your environment and that compromised email to move further down the chain, maybe to an organization that you're working with those kind of fake invoices that Mike was talking about. I'm sure we've all seen examples if you're working in the finance department where you get the, hey, just wanted to let you know that we've updated our account information, or hey, here's an invoice that you weren't expecting, but we really need to get that paid. This is all part of the larger picture here. And what can really happen is it starts to look legitimate. And that's what we're going to look at next. Sometimes we see this called part of the larger cyber kill chain, or if you're familiar with the MITRE attack methodology, this all plays into that kind of key piece to it. So looking at an example of this, as we were looking at a little bit before when Mike was diving in, sometimes those spoofed email addresses, or maybe it's written to look real close, where you're not catching unless you really got an eye on it. In these cases, if email is compromised, you're actually using that to send downstream. You're already a trusted email, and all of a sudden, looking and for spotting a malicious email is not going to work, right? This looks like a legitimate request. It looks like something you would get every day. But unless you're looking at what that link under the View Now button actually is, you're not going to realize that you're going to move down into an attack, right? That could be a malicious payload. It could be a like a portal clone, collecting those credentials that you're going to put in. This is something that happens all of the time, and we even see this used to get around things like MFA, right? Where they're actually doing a prompt for MFA and catching it kind of in the middle. So something to really be aware of. And, you know, you kind of have to build your processes and procedures around the fact that this is so prevalent out there in the threat landscape.
And next we have our poll that's coming up. So Prebh and Mike and Charles gave us a really good, I think, overview of business email compromise and account takeover. And so now we want to ask you, what do you think? And we'll go ahead and open that poll. In your opinion, what's the most effective defense against social engineering attack? As we're going to start talking about that. Is it regular security awareness training? Is it strong technical controls? Is it clear policies and procedures? Or is it fostering that culture of healthy skepticism? So that's a good word. But what do you think is the most? And I would say probably all of these are a great thing, but what do you think is the most important? It looks like we're getting some good answers in already. So regular security awareness training is running away with that. And then I have a question for you, Prebh. I was going to say this one came in through the chat. It's a good time while we're waiting for the poll. Have you seen or heard of a phishing or a business email compromise that had links that still looked legit when you hover over them? So a lot of times people say, you know, just go ahead and hover, don't click on it and try to see what it is. Have you seen any examples of that where it actually looks legit, but it's not legit?
Here's the thing, right? Most email security vendors that I've seen, they're going to wrap the link within their own URL wrapping service. So when you mouse over, you're not really going to see the actual underlying link. So from that aspect, it becomes really difficult to say if is it really a legitimate link or not. But what we've also seen is many attackers actually host their phishing content on legitimate services, right? This could be like a DocuSign. And we've also seen like attackers using services like Google Translate, Bing Translate to translate their web pages. And so when they are including these links within emails, they will be, you know, links to bing.com or google.com. And when somebody clicks on that link, they're like, hey, this is a Google link. I go Google all the time. This is my first page that I open every day. So they click on it. But what's happening is this is actually their non-English web page actually translated into English, which has a link. And it's actually a very sophisticated attack. And then, you know, somebody types in their credentials. An attacker is then able to like communicate with them in their own native language. So to answer your question in short, yes, definitely we've seen many examples where, you know, these links actually look legitimate, but the underlying intent is actually not. And many links also end up getting wrapped using URL shortener services like, you know, Bitly, for example. So just by hovering over, you're not going to know the intent. You're really going to have to use judgment at that point.
That's a good one. And then our poll results. So most people chose regular security awareness training. So for that. So, and then I think, Prebh, you're going to talk to us about social engineering and then how those attacks come about.
Yeah, let's do that. So it's so relevant. So in terms of social engineering attacks, we've already kind of touched upon this topic before, but at a high level, you know, these are like broad range of attacks that include malicious activities. And the key thing is these are accomplished by human interactions. So there has to be a human interaction here for an attack to be considered social engineered. And these attacks, although, you know, I've talked about the context in terms of email, they can happen by social media, phone, or in person, and even many times using your own internal communication channels like Slack, Microsoft Teams, and so forth. So no matter the channel of the communication, the method is consistent. And that is an individual is trying to pose as somebody legitimate and they have an urgent need for information. An example of this would be, you know, an IT worker who needs to verify somebody's login credentials, or a new employee who needs a security token, access token, and just doesn't know the proper policies in place. So they can send somebody a message, a DM, and asking for that token so they can, you know, continue with their attack. So there's that psychological manipulation that is happening to trick users into making security mistakes or giving away sensitive information. And this type of attack is not really new, but they have evolved with time and technology. Many of these type of attacks are becoming more and more prevalent. A lot of these techniques are listed on this slide here. I'm not going to go into the details of all of them. The Verizon report actually does cover many of them, but not all. And then Charles also mentioned Barracuda's own report. We also cover many of these in detail as well. But baiting is actually, one example where we've seen this being used more often over the last like 4 or 5 years, where it's a very simple type of attack. Somebody is just sending, an empty email many times, right? And all they're looking for is a response back. And your own staff could be like, your text cut out, like, what did you mean? And what they're looking to do is do reconciliation of email addresses to see, like, is this email worth launching a targeted attack? So baiting is going to lead to more attacks launched in the future. Deepfakes, probably you will hear more about this over time, in the future. There have only been a handful of these type of attacks launched over the last couple of years, but these are becoming more prominent, especially, the security community has started talking about deepfakes. This is where somebody is, impersonating somebody in the leadership team. Typically in the past, this was done using, a video or an audio message that was, recorded using a machine learning. It looks like, it's your own leader talking about, the company's financial situation or somebody being laid off. But with the emergence of, Gen AI, LLMs, we've actually heard and seen some examples where, live content is being generated and while the meeting is being conducted. So these type of attacks are very few in numbers, very handful, but they're very there's a lot of deception happening there. Smishing, wishing is another like really good example. These type of attacks are not new, but their volume is definitely increasing. This is somebody launching a social engineered attack using SMS message or voicemail, and many times these voicemail messages are all also sent by email. So there's a phishing element also included here.
I can actually vouch for the fact that I'm getting many more SMS phishing attacks than I ever have. I'm not sure what's going on in the world out there, but to your point, Prebh, it's like every day I get a new text or an SMS from somebody I don't know, whatever, and I'm like, really, seriously? Come on now.
Yeah, totally. The thing is, email protection solutions and also like a lot of these cybersecurity solutions are typically not deployed on cell phones, right? Employees still bring their own devices, right? BYOD, such a huge, challenge today, right? People bring their own devices. There's really no way to protect against those type of attacks. So if there's a SMS attack, guess what? That type of attack is going to go undetected. So really good, point there. So in terms of target of these attacks, look at the charts, right? They all look very similar, and that's the idea behind it, right? Regardless of the size of the industry, all industries are going to be prone to these type of email security attacks, right? Some industries might not face the same number of advanced sophisticated attacks, but at the same time, these attacks are increasing, the volume is increasing. Typically, SMBs feel like, they're fine with spam and phishing protection. They don't need to do beyond that, but that's actually not true. Like our own research and what we see across the board is BEC type of attacks are becoming more prominent for small organizations as well. So that's something to keep in mind with those type of attacks. And just wanted to mention a couple of different stats here based on some recent reports by Barracuda is, and this is something the Verizon report doesn't really go into a lot of details, are QR code based attacks, right? So going back to your example, right? When somebody receives an SMS, all the security procedures and policies and applications somebody has in place, they're out of the picture, right? Same with QR code based attack. When somebody opens their phone, scans a QR code within the email, guess what? The entire trajectory is now happening on the cell phone. There's nothing anyone can do at that point, especially if it's your personal device, right? And these QR code based attacks, many solutions have caught up with them. These attacks started by injecting a QR code within the email, but now what we are seeing happen more often is these QR codes are now actually located behind a phishing link, or they could be based on like a Microsoft Word or a PDF file that is embedded within the email or attached to the email. And you'll be surprised like how many people still send HTML files. Those files, going to have so much potential to be compromised. Like I hate HTML files when they're sent by emails, but so many organizations still depend on reports from their local printer being sent in as an HTML. Such a good place for attackers to inject a QR code, which they can manipulate at any time, right? Just by changing the underlying image file or the link. So the key message here is that you need protection regardless of the industry you're part of. We can move to the next slide. So what are the red flags to look out for? Mike, going back to your example that I really liked is, if you don't know somebody, don't let them enter the office building, right? Don't allow somebody to follow you, right? Like just always ask for the badge, and better yet, ask them to scan their own badge, right? And just like that, if you don't know who the email is from, either pick up the phone or confirm, or just don't respond. They will come back to you. They will ask, right? So if you receive an email from somebody, don't act right away, right? A lot of people are incentivized because they want to complete one task to another. So that's what attackers are looking for, right? They're looking to find that individual who is going to want to send them a wire transfer or send them a gift card or that type of fraudulent transaction to happen. So always be on the lookout for unexpected email, phone calls, voice to text messages. Even if you receive a Greek squad PO or like a McAfee invoice within the email, don't call the phone, right? Don't pick up the phone and call that number, because you're never gonna know who's behind that number, right? Always double check. Is this actually renewal coming up or not, right? Don't act in a hurry when you have to provide sensitive information.
If I could
yeah.
quickly layer onto that, if you think about that, what's happening if you call that number? The bad guy on the other end of the number knows that your email is now valid because you got the email from them and you saw the number and you called it. Now they can check on their list, this is a valid email because somebody's on the end there. I'm going to continue to either use this or sell this. So your calling not only gets you in trouble with the bad guys, but also validates that email is live.
Yeah, totally good. You guys can call me a nerd, but what I do, and I love doing this, is go on YouTube and watch these call center fraud videos. People, they're running these call centers and they have all the information. They know what what companies are gonna call this number, so they're ready to pick up the phone and have a conversation with you. So it's such an advanced type of attack, and it's targeted, right? These are not random spam, scam, extortion campaigns. The people are attackers are investing their time into these type of campaigns. So look up these videos. I enjoy watching them on my own. And the other thing is, Mike, you mentioned that fake invoice. These fake invoices, they're not going to have a phishing link. They're not going to have an attachment like a executable, not even a PDF. These are emails that just contain very nicely formatted text, which looks like a legitimate invoice, and the only call to action is to call that phone number. Someone's going to pick up the phone, call that number, and they're going to be told, hey, your McAfee or some sort of subscription is ending. You need to make the purchase today, otherwise your employees are going to lose access. So that's something you need to be very vigilant about.
So in all of this, thanks, Prebh. In all of this, the topic today is the human element, right? And so that really goes to all of these flags that we list here. A lot of these things you already do. I'll go through them very quickly. Check the validity of the source, as I mentioned earlier. Don't just go off of the domain, call the person. Update, patch your OS and applications. That's a known. Remain vigilant when contacted by third parties. Invest in cybersecurity software. You probably have something in place today, but it always makes sense to go back and make sure it's doing what you want it to do. Remember, you control that software. It's a tool for you to use. Only access URLs that begin with HTTPS. I think we all know that. Enable multi-factor authentication. Charles, real quickly, can you give us a couple of examples of really good MFA solutions or how they can be used?
Yeah, absolutely. Integrating them with your main directory services, right? When we see this all the time with Entra ID, formerly known as Azure AD, putting them in place, certainly for your VPN solution, and making sure that there's no exclusions. One of the reasons we see people often get into real deep trouble is because they make those exclusions for even their cloud administration portal accounts sometimes. So make sure they're on your critical assets, your servers, and obviously if you can deploy that across your environment. And then the last one would be, your software as a service. A lot of the time, if that's not integrated with your login methodology, and it's not sometimes managed by the IT department, it's handled by a different one, there might be some gaps there, and those threat actors can absolutely footprint that and find those kind of gaps in your MFA rollout.
Thanks, Charles. The last couple ones here, as I mentioned, if you get that email from PayPal, don't click on it. Log into your PayPal account or whatever that is. Find out directly. Use a password manager. Google has one embedded in its browser. There are other third parties that you can use. And then security awareness training. Let me give you one more story. A number of years ago, I was in Omaha for work, and I walked into this office, very large, nationally known company. They had a security guard up front. Who are you here to see? I'm here to see so-and-so. Can you show me ID? Great. Security number one. Next step was the administrative assistant. Hi, who are you here to see? So-and-so. Can you show me your ID? Yes. Sign here, put your name, who you're going to go see. Put the time. Great. Sit over there. Thank you. And then I said, may I use the men's room? Sure, it's right down the hall. And I was in. I was able to go anywhere in the building I wanted to, anybody's desk at any time. And when I had a conversation with the vice president later on that morning, I said, by the way, you have a huge security breach. What? Yeah, it's the human element. What it should have been is if I asked to use the men's room, it should have been an escort and an escort back. You're kidding. No, I'm not. So again, we're all humans and things happen, and you can put as many roles or gateways in place. But then if you just kind of let your guard down a little bit, somebody's in the door.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Love the stories, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. And that security awareness training, there's a lot of tools out there. I know one of the questions we often get is like how to deploy those and keep them running. Obviously, if you can stagger them out, that helps. Otherwise, everybody kind of raises a flag and lets their coworkers know that this is the day you're running it. Having those automated remediation groups and being able to conduct those internal phishing campaigns is a huge value add. If you can make the content interesting, all the better, right? We do see, depending on the report you look at, 45 to 70% reduction in reported incidents for companies that actually have rolled out a pretty comprehensive security awareness training program. Again, it's defense in depth, right? It's not going to take care of everything, but it is a really key and important part of your security program development. And one of the biggest things I always tell people, especially when I'm working with executive leadership outside of IT, is it's really important to do top-down promotion. Getting buy-in from those leaders in the company goes a really long way. And when there's not buy-in, you can really see that in the results that are kind of shown. Again, want to make sure to avoid those exclusions. That training is going to push that really to the core of your kind of program development. And then we talked a little bit earlier about, trusted verification channels, right? How do you know that you can confirm this? If an incident is occurring, you might have a separate channel set aside just for that, something people commonly overlook. Going to things like verified sources, right? Using those known secure links, or if you're installing applications, and that even includes you folks on here from IT, you go to a malicious ad on the search engine, you're downloading something with your admin access, and now you potentially have a backdoor. So we want to make sure we know where we're going to get our files and our links and our procedures are surrounding that. And then even building in, we talked about procedures and policies. When somebody is in and they've compromised that account, they can be pulling things like your Teams channel chats or your Outlook data. Do you have data retention policy, right? People generally tend to land in one of two camps. Hey, I delete every single email, without fail, or I keep every single email I've ever gotten since 1987, and it's all in my inbox. So if that account gets compromised, you could be, the most trustworthy person in the company, but you might have a lot that's stored up there. And even things like conducting access reviews at a regular cadence. There's nothing wrong with that. We should encourage that. We should make sure we have leadership buy-in on that as well. And then just have some way of measuring that, right? Do you have KPIs? Does this align with your larger business goals? How have you integrated those two things? How have you kind of made that business use case for continuous adoption improvement to your leadership, and making sure that you're working with them to roll this out and keep it developing over time? So, Kim, I know you've been watching questions. And everybody, if you have a question, make sure to put that in the chat there. You got any good ones sitting in the queue?
We do, and I actually have one that I'm going to ask for myself real quick. So we talked about sort of like making people aware and to have them not do it. But what happens when I realize I clicked on it and then I literally realized I should not have done that? So can you guys, one of you take that of sort of like the next education of like, okay, if you did click on it and you recognize it, what is that next step and what you should do around that security awareness piece?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would throw out there is, do have something in place for that established reporting mechanism, right? Encourage that they are reporting that to somebody in potentially IT to get eyes on that situation, verify what may be occurring. If you have an incident response plan, right, you might have some guardrails on what is or is not an incident, but included in that process is going to be, how are we understanding what the triage might be necessary to do this? Do we need to revoke an account session? Do we need to turn off an account? Having those procedures in place and making sure that you're including in your training for whatever your organizational situation is. And that might depend on your department what those next steps are. Is it reporting to a manager? Is it reporting to a couple people? Is that via phone? Is that via text? Is that a Slack channel, a Teams channel? Whatever that is, make sure they know what to do next, and that you have staffing in place to kind of take those next steps. Prebh and Mike, anything come to mind there that I might have missed?
I was going to say the pretext to that is also reporting something that you think might be suspicious. So if you get there and you're about to click, wait a minute, this doesn't look right. What do I do? 9 times out of 10, most companies are smart enough to have a security policy in place that says if you find something or you think something, right, then report it. So, if you, the common thread is if you see something, say something, whatever that is, same idea. If I get an email across my desk and it comes from the CEO and I haven't talked to him or he doesn't talk to me, whatever, what's the first thing I'm going to do? Security policy says, send this to your IT security team. Don't click on anything. Don't open it. Forward it along with a note that says, I don't know if this is legit, please, and then let them do their work.
Right.
That brings, go ahead. Sorry, Prebh.
No, I'm just going to say that totally makes sense.
Yep. Awesome. And Prebh, we did have a question for you just on your topic. So someone asked a question. So on that example that you gave of the fake invoice and all they want to do is call a number, so they don't click on anything. How would you check the validity of that if you're not expecting it? He asked, should I Google McAfee and then find a customer support number? Like, what would be your recommendations if you got that and weren't expecting it?
I would say go back to your own internal processes. Are you used to getting those type of invoices by email or not, right? Have you paid McAfee by an email? Have you paid them by making a phone call, right? These type of services, subscriptions, they will, you would have already subscribed to those, right? So I would say like biggest thing is don't act right away. Check your own records to see like, have you dealt with this vendor, this service before, and how have you done that? That would be the biggest thing. Charles, Mike, anything you want to add?
I'll add to that. We've been talking about organizations, companies. There's also the personal human element. And I mentioned the story about my father-in-law who's 92. A large demographic of victims are elderly people who have computers. Yep, they need them. Yep, email, great. But they're just not quite sure. Do I really have a McAfee subscription? I know that I don't personally, and some others may not, but they may not know that. So I think it's incumbent upon folks who have a certain level of tech savvy to help out that demographic understand some of these things and train some of those things such that don't call the number, or you don't really have that. Or if you're not sure, call me and I'll help you out. But so in the private sector, it's a little bit different than in the corporate sector.
Unfortunately, probably one of those.
Here.
We'll send all calls to Mike. I think one of the things that we've seen elderly folks getting targeted on as well is those kind of deep fake audio calls where maybe some young person, their family might have been involved in some incident and they need to take some next steps. So yeah, security awareness training, that's all important in our families as well, and making sure that we're having discussions. Hey, is it okay if you ever hear something, make sure to give me a call. I'm happy to kind of answer that for you. It does happen all too often.
My father-in-law got one of those calls. He's like, Grandpa, it's me. Oh, really? Yeah, I need $500 to bail out of whatever it was. So my father-in-law was smart. He goes, how's your brother? Oh, he's fine. He doesn't have one. So he knew everything was, so it's kind of thinking about that.
Yep. Well, that brings us up to a good question, I think, for you. What do you think in terms of the generational differences in the workforce? How do they impact our cybersecurity practices and training approaches? And then I will also say and add a caveat to that around the C-suite. So should we make exclusions around C-suite? Because I feel like they're targeted most. So as I say, Prebh, I'll start with you in the generational. Do you do any research around that in terms of the workforce impact around cybersecurity practices?
It's a very interesting topic because I was just talking to some coworkers not too long ago, like how attacks are shifting from email into Microsoft Teams and Slack, right? Like, younger generation, they don't really talk or communicate by email that much. I mean, although that's never going to be eliminated, email is going to remain such a important communication aspect. But now, everybody is on Slack, right? Like I'm on Slack all the time, right? So that's where attackers are also shifting their attack techniques, right? Many of these tools, they do provide external communication as well, like Microsoft Teams. You can talk to vendors but it's not so prevalent on Slack, but it's still, you can open up channels and have communication there. So I think many of the processes and procedures are going to remain the same. They need to be applied the same across different demographics. And also with CISO, right? Like I think the biggest mistake I see there is that many IT administrators will only enable MFA for their CISO, and many times actually they don't, because they don't want to add friction there. They don't want to have their CEO call and then be like, yeah, I can't figure this out, right? Like that's the last thing they want to hear. So either they only use MFA for their leadership, or they don't use any security for their C-suite. I think that's a challenge, right? And that is where defense in layer, that is so important. And also the training aspect, that needs to be applied across the board.
Yep. And Charles, I'm going to sneak one last question in for you. How often do you recommend conducting phishing simulations, and what actions do you take when an employee falls for it? That's a good question.
Yeah. So I mean, this has changed over time, right? I used to see this very common, like quarterly. Personally, I like to stagger them. Again, I don't like kind of lining up at the same time. It's also going to be dependent on the user, right? So you're going to have people at different levels in what they're going to cut. A lot of these solutions will provide automated training for remediation. If somebody falls for a phishing campaign, they're going to go into some specialized training to make sure they don't fall for that again in the future. If they've shown that they've been progressing through some of the available options for phishing campaigns, they'll get more complicated over time. It'll help that user develop over time. So, I would say it's continuous, but you have to balance it out with, not being too often. I would also say there's solutions that can integrate, reporting into the phishing campaigns as well. So if you get a internally run phishing campaign, you're reporting it, but the same mechanism can report actual phishing emails that might be going around the company too. So you've trained your users to report these things right through the portal. Obviously, that's going to be dependent on your company and the solution. But it is something to think about. And then just one last thing on Preb's comment, as you're going through and talking to C-suite, what their motivations are going to be might be a little different than the other departments like IT, right? So putting it in terms of things that are going to be meaningful to them, they're going to be, like you said, highly targeted, and they do have access to a lot of information, a lot of funds, people in the finance department as well. So, specializing that training out for those individuals, or if you have any internal development of applications programming, I would also say that's another one that gets overlooked sometimes. And then, if you have the ability to even work with C-suite to do things like tabletop exercises. We didn't really talk about that today, but that's walking through kind of these role play scenarios where you're choosing something that might stress a company during an incident. I really have seen that make a big difference in the culture when executive leadership is going through a, not deep technical dive, but something that is related to IT and business continuity that's going to help them understand the risks associated with this in their environment. It really can help the company move forward in their security program development.
Perfect. Well, we are over slightly, so we'll end the questions, and then we did log some, so we'll get back to you on those that we didn't have a chance to answer. Just wanted to say thank you, Charles and Mike and Prebh, for a great discussion, good learning, and thank you everyone for your time, and have a great day.